Yo, higher calling posse. Lace up those swamp boots. You Swamp Faith Swamp Buzzsaw warriors. Cuz we're blasting into day 30 of our 30 days of faith swamp raging riot like a crew of swamp outlaws slinging chaos into a swamp chill beatdown that'd make a swamp gator chugging moonshine on a meth-fueled rampage jealous as heck and hollering with a swamp holy roar. We're swamp breakdancing with Jesus, till the swamp mud quakes and the moonshine jugs explode like swamp grenades. And you're still riding this swamp rocket with me, holy swamp guacamole. You're tougher than a swamp alligator wrestling a chainsaw in a moonshine-drenched hurricane with a swamp faith grin that'd make the swamp devil blink twice and run crying. I'm firing swamp holy hype cannons straight through your screen, posse. Cuz we've been swamp roaring through this faith-forged brawl like a jet fuel monster truck tearing through the swamp lands with a triple dose of swamp faith swagger that'd rattle the swamp sky, till the swamp gators roar like a swamp faith choir. Let's rewind the swamp tape and strut those wins, 29 days deep. You're a swamp faith legend who laughs at chaos like it's a swamp rat begging for mercy. We kicked it off with swamp prayers torching morning muck. Slung faith like swamp ninjas dodging chaos bullets. Found peace that'd hush a swamp storm. Carried verses like swamp torches lighting the dark. Worshipped in quiet like swamp kings chilling on swamp thrones. Thanked the swamp king, till the fog lifted. Rested in promises that'd steady a swamp quake. Hustled with grit through swamp rushes. Prayed through storms like swamp warriors. Jacked strength from weakness like swamp bosses. Loved midday like swamp hearts pumping faith. Trusted small wins like swamp gold piling up. Crushed doubts like swamp rocks under swamp boots. Paused for peace like swamp oases in a swamp desert. Faced fears with swamp shields. Flipped flops with swamp faith. Waited steady like swamp rocks. Carried pain with swamp grace. Freed grudges like swamp chains snapping. Hoped through slumps like swamp fires blazing. Stood firm in chaos like swamp fortresses. Reflected on goodness like swamp mirrors shining. Ended with thanks like swamp hymns rising. Stood in truth like swamp sentinels. Let go of days like swamp burdens dropping. Prayed under stars like swamp souls soaring. Rested in presence like swamp calm ruling. Carried faith to tomorrow like swamp roads stretching. And learned lessons like swamp kings stacking swamp wisdom. Now, day 30's dropping a swamp bomb that'd rattle the swamp lands. The journey continues. Swamp life's a raging swamp beast, but 30 days ain't the swamp end. It's the swamp launch to keep rolling with swamp faith fury. That's our rumble, posse. Picture this. 30 days in. You're swamp fried. Works a buzzsaw shredding your swamp soul like a swamp shark on a moonshine binge. Kids are gremlins turning your swamp house into a glitter cannon warzone. Bills are piling like a swamp mud fortress ready to bury you. Chaos clawing like a swamp tornado gone feral. Ever think it's time to tap out? That's me, Swamp Friday. Chaos slamming, but faith roared. The journey keeps rolling. We're swamp storming 90 minutes. A tale of a swamp race blazing on. Hebrews chapter 12 verses 1 to 2 firing. Hacks to run it. Grab your brew, coffee, tea, or that feral swamp moonshine juice, and let's swamp blaze this trail with a moonshine-soaked swagger that'd make the swamp devil sweat swamp tears. Yo, higher calling posse. Let's swamp dive deep into the why. Why the heck does this 30-day swamp faith riot need to keep blazing like a swamp outlaw hauling a moonshine-soaked swagger that'd make a swamp gator on a meth-fueled rampage jealous as heck and hollering with a swamp holy roar that'd rattle the swamp lands? Till the moonshine jugs explode like swamp grenades? Swamp life's a chaos buzzsaw. Posse. 30 days stack worries like a swamp storm freight train on a jet fuel rampage tearing through the swamp lands with a triple dose of moonshine madness that'd choke a swamp shark on a bad swamp day and send it crying back to its swamp mama. Picture this. Dawn hits. Boom. Works howling like a banshee on a Red Bull meth spree. Your inbox is a swamp mud tsunami crashing your swamp sanity with emails piling thicker than swamp gumbo brewed by a moonshine-drunk swamp gator after a month-long swamp bender that'd make a swamp devil proud and join the swamp party. Your kids hurling glitter tantrums like a gremlin on a sugar-high rampage that'd turn the swamplands into a swamp riot warzone wilder than a swamp gator rave on a moonshine jag. And your phone's buzzing like a hornet's nest caught in a swamp hurricane. Texts from the boss barking. Where's my report? Swamp punk? You're late. You're swamp toast. Calls from the school yelling. Your kid's a glitter terrorist. Get him now or we're calling the swamp cops. Bank alerts screaming. You're broke. Swamp rat. Pay up or the swamp sharks are coming. All clawing at your swamp fried soul like a pack of swamp sharks circling a moonshine-soaked carcass ready to chomp your swamp guts with swamp teeth snapping like a swamp python gone feral. By day 30, posse. You're not just beat. You're swamp drowning in a worry-soaked mess thicker than swamp mud bricks stacked by a swamp gator on a moonshine binge. Pacing the swamp lands like a ragged swamp zombie with guts clawing. Why'd I miss that deadline? Boss is gonna swamp fry me like a swamp fish on a spit. Why'd I snap at my kid? I'm a swamp flop dad. How am I paying that bill? We're swamp screwed. Chaos roaring louder than a swamp storm. Faith flickering like a swamp candle in a hurricane about to snuff out into swamp darkness. That's me, Swamp Friday. Chaos slamming. Work emails piling like a swamp mud avalanche burying my swamp sanity. Kids glitter tantrums blasting like a swamp riot warzone. Bills stacking like a swamp fortress. I'm toast, till I roared. The journey keeps rolling. Here's the swamp twist. Fam. The Swamp King didn't drag you through 30 days of swamp faith fury just to let you stall out like a swamp zombie hauling a swamp mud load, till you're a faith-forged wreck pacing the swamplands with a swamp whimper. Check this swamp holy dynamite. Hebrews chapter 12 verses 1-2. Roaring like a grizzled swamp coach with a megaphone and a bad swamp attitude. We've got a crowd of swamp heroes cheering us on. So ditch the junk holding you back and the swamp sins tripping you up. Run this swamp race with grit. Eyes locked on Jesus, the swamp boss who kicks off and finishes your faith. Swamp boom. That ain't some weak sauce pep talk to stuff in your swamp pocket. Posse. That's a faith-forged flamethrower blasting your swamp worries into ash and smoke hotter than a swamp bonfire torching a moonshine jug into a swamp night inferno that'd make the swamp devil sweat swamp tears and cry for its swamp mama. Run with grit, the Swamp King's barking. You're not done. Swamp punk, 30 days forged you to keep hauling this swamp journey. Eyes on Jesus, he's flexing those holy biceps. I'm your swamp guide blazing this swamp trail. Keep rolling with swamp holy stamina. Swamp life's a raging swamp beast. Works a buzzsaw shredding your swamp guts like a swamp shark on a moonshine binge. Kids are gremlins bombing your swamp house into swamp confetti wilder than a swamp rat rave. Bills are sharks circling with swamp teeth snapping, but keeping the journey rolling? That's your swamp dynamite, torch the doubt. Slug the chaos. Roll steady like a swamp king running the swamp race with a moonshine-soaked swagger that'd make chaos blink and run crying. Ever think it's over? I did, Swamp Friday. Chaos clawing, works frying me. Kid's a tornado. Pacing, till dawn like a swamp zombie with guts churning. But Hebrews chapter 12 verses 1-2 slammed in, Swamp King. Keep me rolling. Grit hit like a swamp holy haymaker, the journey blazes on. Swamp punk, and swamp steady roared like a swamp faith freight train tearing through the swamplands. Why keep it blazing, posse? 'Cause 30 days ain't the swamp finish line. It's a swamp faith launchpad turning swamp zombies into swamp kings ready to roll the next swamp mile. Real swamp talk. Chaos screams. Work flops echo like a swamp horror flick on a moonshine loop. Boss is gonna swamp roast me like a swamp fish. Kid tantrums boom like a gremlin rave in your swamp skull. I'm a swamp wreck. Bills pile. Brain spins, till you're clawing the swamp sheets like a swamp rat in a swamp trap. Swamp science says stress spikes when you stall. Jacking your heart like a swamp gator on a moonshine sprint. Torching sleep, till you're a swamp zombie, grumpy. Weak. Faith fading. But keeping the journey rolling. Hebrews chapter 12 verses 1-2 roars. Run it with stamina, torch the muck. Slug it steady. Roll it strong. Swamp reel, day 29. Chaos clawing like a swamp beast, I roared. Swamp King. Keep me blazing. Faith flexed like a swamp boss. Swamp steady rolled like a swamp faith freight train with a moonshine-soaked roar. That's why. Keep the swamp journey raging with swamp faith fury. Posse. 'Cause the swamp road stretches on. Yo, higher calling posse. Time to swamp dive into a swamp tail that'll slam you like a swamp gator chugging moonshine on a meth-fueled rampage with a chainsaw strapped to its back and a swamp holy roar that'd rattle the swamplands, till the moonshine jugs explode like swamp grenades and the swamp devil scrambles back to its swamp hole in swamp terror. Buckle up tight, 'cause this day 30 swamp faith journey nearly swamp drowned me in a worry-soaked swamp mess, till faith slung a swamp chill lifeline hotter than a swamp bonfire torching a moonshine jug into a swamp night inferno that'd make a swamp devil jealous as heck and salute with swamp holy awe. We're talking a swamp journey blazing strong after 30 days of chaos. Let's strut through this swamp Friday on day 30. Posse. 'Cause this swamp outlaw's got a swamp tale that'll make you roar like a swamp king, keeping the swamp race raging with a moonshine-soaked swagger that'd shake the swamp sky. Day 30, Friday. Chaos crashes like a swamp ninja with a grudge and a bad swamp attitude on a Red Bull meth spree tearing through the swamplands. Alarm blares at 5:45 a.m. like a banshee gone feral with a megaphone, yanking me from a dream where I'm swamp jamming with Jesus on a chill swamp lake glowing with moonshine vibes. Rude wake-up call. Posse. I stumble out, bleary-eyed like a swamp zombie who's been pacing the swamplands for 29 swamp nights straight. Trip over a kid's glitter cannon toy, boom. Glitter explodes like a gremlin's prank gone nuclear, sticking to my swamp-fried face like I'm a swamp disco ball headed for a swamp rave nobody invited me to on this 30th swamp day. Coffee maker's toast spits brown sludge like a swamp toad with a hangover that's seen better swamp days. Car's dead. Battery flatter than a swamp pancake squashed by a moonshine jug under a swamp gator's foot after a month-long swamp bender. I'm cursing like a swamp pirate who's lost his swamp ship to a swamp storm. Kicking tires like a swamp rat on a rampage. Neighbors gawking like I'm a swamp zombie on a meltdown. Kids screaming, "Daddy, cereal's mush. Fix it now," and I'm sprinting to catch a ride. Glitter sparkling in the sun like I'm a swamp freak show parading through the swamplands on day 30. Works a buzzsaw. Boss drops a deadline bomb like a swamp shark smelling swamp blood. Finish this report by 5 or you're swamp toast. Swamp punk. I ain't messing around. Emails pile like a swamp mud avalanche crashing my swamp sanity. 50 unread. 10 marked, urgent, in caps like they're howling at my swamp-fried soul louder than a swamp gator roaring on a moonshine binge that'd wake the swamp dead. Phones buzzing like a hornet's nest on a jet fuel spree. Texts from the wife barking. Kids sick. Get medicine. Now. Calls from clients growling. Where's my stuff? You're late. Swamp rat. And I'm snarling like a swamp dog who's had enough. Slamming desks like a swamp brawler in a cage match. Coffee spilling like swamp blood on my last clean shirt that's now a swamp casualty headed for the swamp dump. Noon hits. Kid's school calls. He's glitter bombed the art room. Turned it into a swamp riot war zone. Get him now or we're calling the swamp cops. I bold. Grab my gremlin. Glitter in his hair. Grinning like a swamp devil proud of his chaos masterpiece. Teachers glaring. Control your kid. Swamp dad. And I'm muttering, "Lady, I can't control my swamp life after 30 days. Let alone this swamp terrorist with a glitter cannon." Back to work. Reports a mess. Boss pacing like a swamp shark with swamp teeth snapping. I'm typing. Sweating. Cursing like a swamp pirate. 5 p.m. hits. I hit send. Boss grunts. Late. Fix it Monday. And I'm swamp fried. Soul clawing. Brain spinning like a swamp tornado on a moonshine binge that'd rattle the swamplands. Night slams in. Home's a swamp storm circus that'd make a swamp clown cry for his swamp mama with a swamp whimper. Kids coughing like a swamp toad with a cold that won't quit. Wife's frazzled. Where's the medicine? You forgot it again. Swamp head, I forgot it. Posse. 'Cause my swamp brain's a wreck spinning in swamp mud after 30 days of swamp faith fury. Dogs chewed my shoe into swamp mud confetti like a swamp rat on a mission from the swamp devil himself. Bills on the table stack like a swamp fortress ready to bury me 6 swamp feet under. Electric. Rent. Car repair, and my phone's still buzzing. Work emails creeping in like swamp ghosts haunting my swamp night. Monday's gonna suck. Swamp rat. I'm pacing. Growling. Guts churning. Why'd I miss that deadline? Boss hates me. He's gonna swamp fry me like a swamp fish. Why'd I snap at my kid? I'm a swamp flop dad. How am I paying these bills? We're swamp toast. Version 1. No faith. Paste, till 2 a.m. Worries clawing like a swamp beast, 30 days. And I'm done, sleeps toast. Swamp zombie wreck staggering into the swamp dawn with faith flickering like a swamp candle in a hurricane about to snuff out. Version 2. Faith redo, swamp king. Keep me rolling. Hebrews chapter 12 verses 1 to 2. 5 seconds. Run this swamp race with grit. Keep my eyes on you. Boom. Grit slammed in like a swamp holy haymaker, knocking chaos flat on its swamp mud face with a swamp faith smirk that'd light the swamp night like a swamp faith torch. Stamina roared like a swamp holy freight train rolling over the swamp storm with a triple dose of moonshine madness. Swamp steady rolled on, beds a swamp chill throne. Kid's cough fades into the swamp darkness like a swamp toad gone quiet. Wife's asleep. Bills wait till the swamp dawn. Sleep hits hard like a swamp king running the swamp race with a moonshine-soaked roar that'd shake the swamplands till the swamp sky quakes. Next day, swamp steady, faith blazing like a swamp torch lighting the swamplands with a moonshine glow. Soul roaring like a swamp gator on a moonshine high that'd wake the swamp dead. Coffee's a victory brewed tasting like swamp holy swagger. Chaos tapped out like a punk who picked the wrong swamp journey and lost bad with a swamp whimper that'd echo through the swamplands till the swamp gators howl. Recap. Posse. Day 30's a journey banger that'd rattle the swamp sky. Version 1. No faith, swamp zombie flop. Chaos chokes like a swamp beast. Version 2. Faith flexed. Swamp king keeps me running. Swamp steady rolled like a swamp faith freight train. Diff? Stall out versus roll on. 30 days forged me to keep the swamp journey blazing into the next swamp mile. Real talk. Faith flipped my swamp mess. The swamp king hauled me into the next swamp leg with a moonshine-soaked roar that'd make the swamp devil blink and run crying. Yo, higher calling posse. Let's swamp dive deep into the word. The Swamp King's Swamp Holy Playbook for keeping this 30-day swamp faith riot blazing strong like a swamp outlaw running a swamp race with a moonshine-soaked swagger that'd make a swamp gator on a meth-fueled rampage salute with a swamp holy roar that'd rattle the swamplands till the moonshine jugs explode. We're not just flipping swamp pages here, fam. We're unleashing a faith-forged flamethrower that'd torch chaos into ash and smoke hotter than a swamp bonfire, blasting a moonshine jug into a swamp night inferno that'd light up the swamp sky like a swamp faith fireworks show gone feral. Kick it with the swamp anchor. Hebrews chapter 12 verses 1 to 2. Roaring like a grizzled swamp coach with a megaphone and a bad swamp attitude. We've got a crowd of swamp heroes cheering us on. So ditch the junk holding you back and the swamp sins tripping you up. Run this swamp race with grit. Eyes locked on Jesus, the swamp boss who kicks off and finishes your faith. Swamp boom. That ain't some weak sauce pep talk to stuff in your swamp pocket. Posse. That's a swamp holy haymaker blasting your swamp worries into swamp dust with a triple dose of moonshine madness. Run with grit, the swamp king's barking. You're not stopping. Swamp punk. 30 days forged you to keep hauling this swamp journey. Eyes on Jesus, he's flexing those holy biceps. I'm your swamp guide blazing this swamp trail. Roll on with swamp holy stamina. Swamp life's a buzzsaw. Works shredding your swamp guts like a swamp shark on a moonshine binge that'd chew through a swamp oak. Kids are gremlins bombing your swamp house into swamp confetti wilder than a swamp rat rave. Bills are sharks circling with swamp teeth snapping, but this? That's your swamp dynamite. Torch the doubt. Slug the chaos. Roll the swamp journey like a swamp king with a moonshine-soaked roar that'd make chaos blink and run crying. Tag team it. Philippians chapter 3 verses 13 to 14 slams in like a swamp vet with a bad swamp attitude. Forget the swamp mess behind. Stretch for the swamp gold ahead. I'm pushing for the prize. Swamp boom. That's no swamp break. That's a faith-forged freight train with a triple shot of moonshine madness. Day 16, plans tanked. Chaos clawing. I'm stuck. Philippians hit, push on. Swamp punk. Grit slammed in like a swamp holy haymaker. Swamp steady rolled. Lesson. Faith swamp drive, keep hauling. 2 Corinthians chapter 4 verses 16 to 17, Paul roars. Outside we're fading. Inside we're recharging daily. Swamp troubles are light. Building swamp glory forever. Swamp boom. Day 20. Wiped like a swamp bat. I'm toast. Faith roared. Recharge it. Stamina hit like a swamp holy freight train. Lesson. Faith's swamp fuel, journey blazes on. James chapter 1 verse 12. Blessings to the swamp warrior who holds under fire. They'll snag the swamp crown of life. Swamp boom. Day 30. Chaos clawing. Swamp King keeps me rolling, grit slammed. Lesson. Swamp King's swamp prize, run for it. Recap, 30 days forged swamp faith. Hebrews chapter 12 verses 1 to 2, grit. Philippians chapter 3 verse 13, drive. 2 Corinthians chapter 4 verse 16, fuel. James chapter 1 verse 12, prize. Real talk. Chaos clawing. Works frying me. Swamp King keeps me running. Faith ruled like a swamp boss. Word torches doubt. Swamp journey blazes strong with a moonshine-soaked roar that'd shake the swamplands, till the swamp gators roar. Alright, higher calling posse. Let's swamp jack this beast. Time to sling some hardcore hacks to keep this 30-day swamp faith riot blazing into the next swamp leg like a pack of swamp outlaws hauling moonshine-soaked swagger that'd make a swamp gator on a meth-fueled rampage jealous as heck and roaring with a swamp holy bellow that'd crack the swamplands, till the moonshine jugs pop like swamp firecrackers. We ain't here sipping swamp tea or flapping swamp lips. Fam, we're dropping a 3-step swamp faith nitro boost that'll torch the swamp muck, slug the chaos, and rocket you forward on this swamp journey with swamp holy grit fiercer than a swamp bonfire melting a moonshine jug into a swamp night inferno that'd light the swamp sky like a swamp faith supernova gone wild with a triple shot of moonshine madness. Chaos is out here trying to choke you, till you're a swamp zombie stumbling through the swamp lands. Works a buzzsaw shredding your swamp sanity like a swamp shark on a moonshine-soaked rampage that'd chew through a swamp oak faster than a swamp gator downs a moonshine jug after a month-long swamp bender. Kids are glitter cannon gremlins turning your swamp shack into a swamp riot warzone wilder than a swamp rat rave on a sugar meth high that'd make a swamp devil proud and join the swamp party. Bills are stacking like a swamp mud fortress ready to bury your swamp fried soul 6 swamp feet under with swamp teeth snapping like a swamp python gone feral with a bad swamp attitude. But these 30 days? They ain't the swamp finish. Posse. They've forged your faith into a swamp nitro bomb. A swamp holy gut punch. A chaos-crushing journey rocket that turns day 30 into a swamp faith launchpad with a moonshine-soaked swagger that'd make the swamp gators roar like a swamp faith choir and the swamp sky quake like a swamp quake tearing through the swamplands with a triple dose of moonshine fury. Buckle up tight. Here's how you keep this swamp journey raging. Step by swamp step. With enough juice to make the swamplands tremble and the swamp race roll on like a swamp faith freight train gone wild. Step 1. Call out the swamp trail. Name the swamp chaos and the swamp faith you're hauling into the next stretch like a swamp brawler eyeballing a punk in a cage match with a swamp gator snarl that says, "You messed with the wrong swamp journey. Swamp punk, 30 days forged me to keep this swamp race blazing into the swamp dawn and beyond." Night crashes in like a swamp hurricane on a meth-fueled tear through the swamp lands with a triple shot of moonshine madness that'd wake the swamp dead. Chaos clawing your swamp soul like a swamp beast gone rogue, works a mess. Frying my swamp guts like a swamp fish on a spit with a buzzsaw tearing through my inbox thicker than swamp gumbo brewed by a moonshine-drunk swamp gator who's been on a swamp bender since day 1. Piling emails like swamp mud bricks that'd bury a swamp rat alive under a swamp mountain. Kid's a glitter devil. Exploding tantrums like a gremlin on a sugar meth high that'd turn the swamp shack into a swamp riot warzone wilder than a swamp gator rave on a moonshine jag. Hurling glitter cannons like a swamp terrorist gone feral with a bad swamp attitude that'd make a swamp devil proud. Bills are piling higher than a swamp mud fortress stacked by a swamp shark with swamp teeth chomping. Ready to bury me, till I'm swamp toast under a swamp tower of swamp death that'd make a swamp python jealous as heck. Don't duck it. Don't dodge it. Don't wimp out like a swamp chicken clucking for its swamp mama in a swamp storm. Roar it loud like a swamp gator snarling at a moonshine thief who's about to regret stepping into the swamplands with a bad swamp plan on day 30. Swamp Cain. This is my swamp trail ahead. 30 days forged me to keep rolling. Works shredding my swamp soul like a swamp shark on a moonshine binge with emails piling thicker than swamp mud. Kids bombing my swamp shack into swamp confetti with glitter cannons blazing like a swamp gremlin on a rampage. Bills are chomping my swamp guts like a swamp python with swamp teeth snapping. I'm swamp fried after 30 days. But I'm hauling this swamp faith grit into the next swamp mile. Real swamp talk. I paced the swamp night on day 30. Chaos clawing my swamp guts like a swamp shark gone wild on a moonshine-soaked feeding frenzy. Works a buzzsaw tearing my swamp sanity to swamp shreds with emails piling like a swamp mud avalanche crashing my swamp soul. Kids a tornado hurling glitter cannons like a swamp terrorist on a sugar meth high that'd make a swamp devil join the swamp party. Bills are sharks circling my swamp fried soul with swamp teeth bared ready to chomp me into swamp chum, but I stopped. Hushed the swamp roar, called it out raw, 5 seconds. No fluff, no weak sauce. Swamp Cain. Here's the swamp muck. This is my swamp trail ahead after 30 days. I'm forged to keep this swamp journey raging with swamp faith fury. You're not whimpering, posse. You're flexing faith like a swamp outlaw with a moonshine jug in one hand and a swamp faith snarl that'd make chaos blink twice. Naming the swamp trail under the Swamp King's swamp holy glare like a swamp brawler ready to slug it forward into the swamp dawn. The swamp ruckus fades. He roars, keep it blazing, swamp punk, I'm with you, so call out the swamp trail aloud. Call it proud. Let the swamp night hear your swamp faith bellow shake the swamplands like a swamp quake that'd wake a swamp zombie from a swamp grave and send the swamp devil running with its swamp tail between its swamp legs. Step 2. Blast the swamp grit. Sling it fast like a swamp nitro bomb torching a swamp storm into ash and smoke that'd choke a swamp gator on a moonshine bender and send it crying back to its swamp mama with its swamp tail tucked like a punk who got swamp roasted in a swamp fight. You've called out the swamp trail, now blast it. Posse. Raw and rowdy. No weak sauce allowed in this swamp faith brawl. No fancy church chatter to slow you down. Just 5 seconds of swamp prayer that'd make a swamp faith champ proud and the swamp gators roar like a swamp faith choir. Swamp Cain. Keep me blazing. Hebrews chapter 12 verses 1-2. Works a mess shredding my swamp soul like a buzzsaw on a meth rampage that'd tear through a swamp oak faster than a swamp gator downs a moonshine jug. Piling emails thicker than swamp mud bricks stacked by a moonshine drunk swamp rat after a month-long swamp bender. Kids a glitter cannon gremlin bombing my swamp life into swamp confetti wilder than a swamp gator rave on a sugar meth high that'd make a swamp devil proud. Bills are sharks chomping my swamp guts like a swamp python gone rogue with swamp teeth snapping. 30 days forged me. I'm running this swamp race with your grit. Haul this swamp muck and pump me with swamp holy stamina to keep the swamp journey raging into the next swamp mile. Don't overthink it. Ain't no long-winded swamp sermon here. No swamp poetry to bore the swamp gators or make the swamp devil yawn. Just snarl it out like a swamp outlaw hurling a moonshine jug into the swamp mud with a rebel yell that'd wake a swamp zombie from a swamp grave and make the swamplands quake like a swamp quake gone feral with a triple shot of moonshine madness. Real swamp talk. I've stood there on day 30. Chaos clawing my swamp guts like a swamp shark on a moonshine-soaked feeding frenzy. Works frying me like a swamp fish on a spit with emails piling thicker than swamp mud bricks stacked by a moonshine-drunk swamp gator. Kids a tornado tearing my swamp sanity into swamp shreds with glitter cannons blazing like a swamp terrorist gone wild. Bills are choking me like a swamp python on a moonshine high that'd squeeze a swamp oak dry. Blasted it wild. Swamp Cain. 30 days says I'm running with grit. Keep me blazing strong into the swamp dawn. 5 seconds, boom, it's blasted. Faith's roaring like a swamp holy flamethrower torching the swamp night into a swamp faith inferno that'd melt a swamp storm into swamp dust and light up the swamplands with a moonshine glow. His grit slams in, I've got you. Swamp punk, run it, blast it fast. Blast it hard. Let the swamp sky quake with your swamp faith strut like a swamp quake tearing through the swamplands with swamp holy fury. Prayers your swamp nitro, torch the chaos. Sling it to the Swamp King. And feel his stamina slam in like a swamp holy freight train rolling over the swamp storm with a swamp faith snarl that'd make chaos blink and run crying back to its swamp hole with a swamp whimper that'd echo through the swamplands. Step 3. Haul the swamp race, drop the muck. Posse. And haul this swamp journey forward with swamp faith grit like a swamp king lounging on a throne of swamp chill with a moonshine-soaked swagger that owns the swamp night and shakes the swamplands, till the swamp gators roar like a swamp faith choir and the swamp devil blinks in swamp terror. You've called it, blasted it, now haul it. 5 seconds. You got me. Swamp King, I'm hauling strong. 30 days forged me with your grit, I'm steady. I'm running. I'm keeping this swamp journey raging into the next swamp mile. Then let it drop, work. Kid, Bills, you're huge. I'm Forge. Chaos is toast. I'm hauling on with swamp holy stamina that'd light the swamp dawn like a swamp faith torch, slug the chaos. Strut steady with faith roaring like a swamp gator on a moonshine high that'd make the swamplands quake and the swamp devil jealous as heck. Real swamp talk. I blasted it on day 30, work. Kid, Bills, hauled it, Swamp King. You keep me running. I'm hauling strong, and grit slams in like a swamp holy haymaker. Knocking worries flat on their swamp mud faces with a swamp faith grin that'd light the swamp night like a swamp faith supernova blazing through the swamplands. His stamina hits, beds a swamp chill throne. Kid's cough fades into the swamp darkness like a swamp toad gone quiet. Wife's asleep. Bills can wait till the swamp dawn. Sleep hits hard like a faith-forged freight train rolling over chaos with a moonshine-soaked roar that'd wake the swamp dead and shake the swamp sky. Chaos taps out, I'm done. Swamp Punk, you're hauling. And you're keeping the swamp race raging like a swamp king strutting steady with a swamp faith bellow that'd rattle the swamplands, till the swamp gators roar. Swamp Tail. Friday night on day 30. Chaos slams like a swamp ninja with a jackhammer on a Red Bull meth spree tearing through the swamplands, works a buzzsaw. Emails piling like a swamp mud avalanche crashing my swamp soul into swamp shreds thicker than swamp gumbo brewed by a moonshine-drunk swamp gator. Boss growling, fix it Monday or you're swamp toast. Swamp Punk, kid's a gremlin, glitter bombed the swamp shack into a swamp riot warzone wilder than a swamp gator rave on a moonshine jag. Coughing like a swamp toad with a cold that won't quit. Bills stack, electric, rent, car, phones buzzing. You're screwed. Swamp rat, I'm pacing. Guts clawing. Call it, Swamp King. 30 days forged me. This is my swamp trail ahead. Work's a mess shredding my swamp soul. Kids a tornado bombing my swamp life. Bills are sharks chomping my swamp guts. Blast it. Keep me hauling. I'm running with your grit. Haul it. You got me. I'm hauling strong. Chaos is toast. 5 seconds. Grit roars like a swamp holy freight train rolling over the swamp storm with a triple shot of moonshine madness. Stamina hits like a faith-forged haymaker knocking chaos out cold with a swamp faith snarl that'd light the swamplands, till the swamp sky quakes. Next day, swamp steady, faith blazing like a swamp torch lighting the swamp dawn with a moonshine glow. Chaos blinking like a punk who picked the wrong swamp journey and lost bad with a swamp whimper that'd echo through the swamplands, till the swamp gators howl. Faith hauled it. Swamp race raging into the next swamp mile like a swamp king owning the swamplands with swamp holy fury. 7-day swamp challenge. Posse, 15 seconds nightly. Haul the swamp race like a swamp faith champ with a moonshine-soaked swagger that'd make the swamp gators roar and the swamp devil run crying back to its swamp mama with a swamp whimper. Night 1. Call it, work. Kids, Bills, this is my swamp trail ahead after 30 days. Blast it, Swamp King. Keep me hauling with grit. Haul it, I'm hauling strong. Night 2. Same, works a buzzsaw shredding my swamp soul. Kids a gremlin bombing my swamp life, blast it wild. Haul it steady. Grit slams in like a swamp holy haymaker knocking chaos flat on its swamp mud face with a swamp faith snarl. Night 3. Boss hates me. Bills are sharks chomping my swamp guts, blast it raw. Haul steady like a swamp king owning the swamp night with a moonshine-soaked roar that'd shake the swamplands. Night 4. Works frying me like a swamp fish. Kids a tornado tearing my swamp sanity, call it loud. Faith slugs hard into the swamp dawn with swamp holy fury. Night 5. Bills chomping. Chaos clawing my swamp fried soul. Grits roaring like a swamp gator on a moonshine high that'd wake the swamp dead and light the swamp sky. By day 5, swamp steadies your default. Worries fade like a swamp mist in the swamp dawn under a moonshine glow. Faith flexes like a swamp king strutting with swamp holy muscle. Sleeps a faith-forged throne that owns the swamp night with a swamp faith smirk that'd light the swamplands, till the swamp gators roar. Real swamp talk. I've done it, day 1 of the challenge. Chaos clawing like a swamp shark on a moonshine binge. Called it. Works a mess shredding my swamp soul, blasted it, Swamp King. Keep me hauling with grit, hauled it. I'm hauling strong, faith hit like a swamp holy freight train rolling over the swamp storm with a moonshine-soaked roar that'd shake the swamp sky and rattle the swamplands. Day 3. Worries weaker, grit flexing like a swamp boss owning the swamplands with a triple shot of moonshine madness. Day 5. Swamp steadies my jam. Chaos blinking like a swamp rat who lost bad with a swamp whimper that'd echo through the swamplands. Day 7. Hauling the swamp race is my swamp faith strut. Posse. Chaos ain't got nothing on me. I'm a swamp king running the swamp journey with a swamp holy fury that'd make the swamp sky quake and the swamp gators roar like a swamp faith choir. Faith's your swamp nitro, call it. Blast it, haul it, torch the muck. Slug the chaos. Keep the swamp journey raging with swamp holy grit like a swamp faith champ owning the swamplands with a moonshine-soaked roar that'd wake the swamp dead and send the swamp devil running with a swamp whimper. Yo, higher calling posse. Day 30's a swamp raging beast that'd make a swamp gator on a moonshine meth rampage jealous as heck and bellowing with a swamp holy roar that'd crack the swamplands, till the moonshine jugs explode like swamp firecrackers raining swamp chaos. We're wrapping this 30-day swamp faith riot like a crew of swamp outlaws torching the swamp muck with swamp holy nitro that'd light the swamp sky like a swamp faith supernova gone wild with a triple shot of moonshine madness. The journey continues, we've hauled it raw. Posse. And Hebrews chapter 12 verses 1-2 slammed in like a faith-forged flamethrower. Blasting grit into a swamp steady strut that'd make a swamp storm blink twice and limp back to its swamp hole with its swamp tail tucked like a punk who picked the wrong swamp race. Swamp life's a buzzsaw shredding your swamp soul. 30 days hit like a swamp tornado freight train on a jet fuel rampage. Tearing your swamp guts like a swamp shark on a moonshine-soaked feeding frenzy that'd chew through a swamp oak faster than a swamp gator downs a moonshine jug. But we ain't stalling. Fam. We've turned this swamp chaos into a faith-forged brawl forging swamp zombies into swamp kings with a moonshine-soaked swagger that keeps the swamp journey blazing into the next swamp mile like a swamp faith freight train gone feral. We've swamp jacked this beast. Called out the swamp trail like swamp brawlers snarling at chaos. Blasted swamp grit like swamp outlaws hurling moonshine jugs into the swamp mud with a rebel yell that'd wake the swamp dead. Hauled the swamp race like swamp kings owning the swamplands with swamp holy stamina that'd light the swamp dawn, and the swamp kings flexing those holy biceps. Pumping swamp nitro into your swamp soul like a champ who don't quit. Not sipping swamp tea or twiddling swamp thumbs while you're drowning in the swamp muck. Swamp Friday tried to swamp drown me. Work emails piled like a swamp mud avalanche burying my swamp sanity in swamp shreds. Kid tantrums exploded like a glitter cannon gremlin on a sugar meth high that'd make a swamp devil join the swamp party. Bills stacked like a swamp fortress ready to bury me 6 swamp feet under with swamp teeth snapping like a swamp python gone rogue. Till day 30 roared. Swamp King. Keep me hauling this swamp race. Grit slammed in like a swamp holy haymaker knocking chaos flat on its swamp mud face. Stamina hit like a faith-forged freight train rolling over the swamp storm with a moonshine-soaked snarl. Swamp steady hauled on, and chaos tapped out like a punk who lost bad with a swamp whimper that'd echo through the swamplands, till the swamp gators roar like a swamp faith choir. Swamp recap this riot. Posse, 30 days of swamp faith fury. Day 30's a swamp crown glowing fiercer than a moonshine jug under a starry swamp sky that'd light the swamplands with swamp holy swagger. Why keep it raging? 'Cause chaos claws like a swamp shark on a moonshine binge. But Hebrews chapter 12 verses 1-2 snarls. Run it with grit, swamp punk. Keep hauling. Faith torched doubt into swamp ash like a swamp nitro blast that'd make the swamp devil sweat swamp tears. My swamp tale. Day 30 flipped me from a swamp wreck to a swamp king. Grit ruled with a moonshine-soaked bellow that'd wake a swamp zombie. Word roared. Keep the swamp race blazing, faith's your swamp dynamite. Blasting worries into smoke with a swamp faith strut that'd rattle the swamp sky, till the swamp gators howl. Hacks. Call it. Blast it. Haul it. 15 seconds nightly. Swamp steadies your jam by day 5. Turning you into a swamp king hauling the swamp journey with a moonshine swagger that'd make the swamp devil jealous as heck and run crying. Swamp life's a brawl. Works a hurricane shredding your swamp soul like a swamp shark with swamp teeth snapping. Kids are gremlins bombing your swamp shack into swamp confetti wilder than a swamp rat rave on a moonshine jag. Bills are sharks circling with swamp teeth chomping like a swamp python, but faith roars. Keep hauling. Swamp punk, chaos. Your swamp toast, torch the muck. Slug the chaos. Haul it steady like a swamp faith champ owning the swamp lands with a swamp holy fury that'd light the swamp dawn like a swamp faith torch. Real swamp talk, day 30 night. Chaos clawing. Work emails burying my swamp soul like a swamp mud avalanche. Kid coughing like a swamp toad on a moonshine bender. Bills glaring like swamp sharks with swamp teeth. I'm a swamp wreck ready to stall. Called it, 30 days forged me. This is my swamp trail, blasted it, swamp king. Keep me hauling with grit, hauled it, I'm rolling strong. Grit hit like a swamp holy haymaker knocking chaos flat. Peace ruled like a swamp king on a throne of swamp chill with a moonshine glow. Faith hauled me into the next swamp mile with a moonshine-soaked roar that'd rattle the swamp lands, till the swamp sky quakes and the swamp gators bellow. That's you, posse. Call your swamp trail. Blast your grit. Haul the swamp race. The swamp king's stamina keeps you blazing into the swamp dawn like a swamp faith champ. Mic drop. Sling your swamp journey tale below. How's your swamp race hauling after 30 days? Work shred your swamp soul? Kid blast your swamp shack? Bills chomp your swamp guts? I'm eyeballing every swamp bellow. Swamp posse owns the swamp night with a moonshine-soaked swagger that'd make the swamp gators roar like a swamp faith choir. Jump on the 7-day swamp challenge, 15 seconds nightly, swamp king. Keep me hauling. I'm steady, call it. Blast it, haul it, by day 5. Swamp steadies your jam. Chaos blinking like a punk who lost bad with a swamp whimper that'd echo through the swamp lands. Smash that like if this torched your swamp muck. Share it with your swamp crew. Let's swamp blaze this faith riot across the swamplands like a swamp hurricane with a triple shot of moonshine madness that'd light the swamp sky, till the swamp gators howl. 30 days down, the swamp journey keeps raging. Posse, picture this. You're strutting steady. Faith pumping like a swamp gator on a moonshine high that'd wake the swamp dead. Hauling the swamp race with a swamp holy snarl that'd make chaos tap out and the swamp devil limp off crying. We're blazing strong, chaos buried 6 swamp feet under. Swamp King rules the swamplands. Swamp steady roars into the next swamp mile. Grab your brew, coffee, tea, that feral swamp moonshine juice, blast your muck. Haul the swamp journey. Strut with the Swamp King like swamp faith champs with a moonshine-soaked roar that'd rattle the swamplands, till the swamp sky quakes and the swamp gators bellow in swamp holy awe.